There was a man standing on the scale trying to weigh himself. And as he's standing on the scale, he's sucking in his gut, trying to make himself look skinny. And his wife sees him sucking in his gut, and she starts to laugh at him. And she says, "Sweetheart, sucking in your belly is not going to help you when you weigh yourself." So he says, "Of course it will. I have to be able to read the numbers on the scale." The last few months, all we've done every single day is look at the numbers. We get up in the morning and the first thing we do is we check the positivity rates, and we're keeping track of the number of cases and how many hospital beds and what's the death rate at. For months, we have obsessed over the numbers. Now, there are some good Corona jokes I could say instead of the numbers. But if I were to tell you a Corona joke, we need to quarantine you for 2 weeks to make sure that you get it. It's really not a joking matter, Corona. In the olden days, the olden days, like 2019, before March 2020. So if you walked into a bank with a mask, they would call the cops to arrest you. Today, if you walk into a bank without a mask, they're going to call the cops to arrest you. So masks are no joking matter. This is serious stuff. Although I am talking to you today from an empty synagogue, so I'm not wearing a mask. And chances are you're watching me at home on your couch, or you're driving in the car, or you're alone, and you're also not wearing a mask. But I want to tell you who is right now wearing a mask. At this very second, you know who's wearing a mask? God himself. God alone. Yes. God has put on a mask, and God has hidden himself behind the concealment of a face covering. We're about to enter Rosh Hashana, celebrating the creation of the world, and most especially the creation of the human being, the crown jewel of God's creation. So if we're going to be celebrating Rosh Hashanah, we obviously know and we believe that the world was created by God. That's why we are celebrating his creation of the universe on Rosh Hashanah. That's why we are accepting his kingdom upon us. The main theme of all the prayers that we say over Rosh Hashanah is about accepting God and his kingdom. We blow the shofar as a coronation blast, as we recrown God once again to be king upon us. So God is our king. He's our creator. But do you see him? Can you recognize him? Now, this past week, we've had so many people walking into this shul, this Chabad Center the last week. Tons of people come for packages, volunteers. It's been amazing, crazy, amazing. Many people walked in, I haven't seen them in many, many months, wearing masks. And there was quite a few that I could not recognize. If you met God in the supermarket tomorrow, would you recognize him? If you had a divine experience right now, would you see him? You might see God and not ever realize that you had just witnessed or experienced a divine revelation. You know why? Because God never goes out in public with his face uncovered. God does not go out in public unless he's wearing a mask. Even to Moses, to Moshe Rabbeinu, the most trusted servant of God, the most loyal and humble man to walk on the earth, the person that God calls the whole base in my entire house, he's the most trustworthy person I have. Moses is a man that can spend 40 days on Mount Sinai talking to God, and as the Torah says, panim b'panim, they speak face to face as people would have a conversation, direct conversation. And yet, even this man, Moses himself, begs God. He beseeches God. He says to God, please show me your face. I want to see your face. I want to know what you look like, says Moshe to God. And you know what God tells Moses? Ki lo yirani ha'adam v'chai. No man can see my face and live. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the story where God puts Moses in the rock and he shows him the back of his face. But to see the face of God, no man has seen God without a concealment, without a mask. And there's many verses in the Torah that describe how God conceals himself, how God hides himself. But we don't need verses from the Torah to know that God conceals himself. We're living in a world of concealment. Our experience is one of a God that is hidden behind a mask. Now, Kabbalah explains that this is intentional. God deliberately created a world that will be socially distanced from him. God wanted a world, God deliberately created a world that will be socially distanced. But why? If we are his children, if we are his beloved creation, if we are God's chosen nation, why would he want to socially distance himself from us? Why wouldn't God want to be as open, as accessible, as revealed, as close to us as he possibly could be? The answer is simple. The answer is simple, yet counterintuitive. To allow us to become closer to him. The reason why God is wearing a mask is in order for us to find him. You know, this whole social distancing idea is very unique. If you want to be close to someone, then you need to be far. People who love their elderly parents, their grandparents, were actually more distanced from them in the last few months because of their love for them. Truth to be told, the idea of you need to be close, you need to be far, is a known concept in Judaism. There's many ideas in the Torah where only when there's distance and boundaries could you come close. One of the most important mitzvahs in the Torah, the foundation of a Jewish home, is the concept of a mikvah, where a woman, for usually 12 days of a month, is not able to be intimate with her husband. During the time that she has her cycle, and then during the 7 days of waiting, there's separation, there's distance that happens where the husband and wife can't be intimate. Now, is it hard to not be intimate and physically close to your wife for so long? Yes, it is. You can bet it's very hard. But the power of the reunion after the mikvah, the intensity of the love, the depth of the connection that I feel with my wife after that separation is unbelievable. The power of our relationship is far more deep. It's far more powerful because there are times that we must be physically distant. And that physical distance teaches us how to emotionally come close. The physical distance teaches us how to emotionally connect with each other. Distance creates a closeness. How many of you have had that experience where your kids were fighting with you all the time? They thought you were the stupidest person in the universe. And then they went to college, and all of a sudden, they love you. Or how many of you have gotten sick of your parents nudging you every day, calling and nudging, and then one day, God forbid, your father has a heart attack. Your mother ends up in the ICU with an infection, and all of a sudden, you're afraid you might lose them, and you realize just how much you love them, how much you need them. The distance makes the heart grow close. The separation allows for a far greater reunion afterwards. And so this was the plan of God. God had a desire to create a universe. But he didn't just want a spiritual galaxy and a spiritual reality where the angels would be in tremendous awe of God, praising his name and singing his wondrous deeds. Kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. What God wanted, as the Medrash tells us, was a dwelling in the Tachtonim, a home in a distant place. God wanted a world that would be distanced from God, that would not be able to see God, where his greatness would not be revealed. And there we should search for him. The distance will make us look for him. And eventually then we find him. Because the point of the distance, the point of God creating a world that would not be able to see his face, was not because God wanted to be far from us. No, the opposite is true. God desired a closeness with us far more than he desired a closeness with any of the angels, any of the seraphim, any of the spiritual celestial beings. But the only way that a real relationship could come is if he would be hidden and we would find him. This is an experience that we've all seen the last few months. In the distance of Corona, in the panic, in the pandemic, in the fear that has taken over our country, taken over our lives, so many people have found a way in the distance to become closer to people than they never would have been before. I know firsthand of many relationships that have begun from volunteers volunteering every week, whether it's on Wednesday at the Chabad University giving out food, helping others, people that know that someone is alone and going to bring them food, and developing whole new relationships that didn't exist. I know our experience here, I know other rabbis, is that our learning has actually grown tremendously in the last few months of Corona. The number of people that are watching our classes every single night of the week that I'm teaching or running a program or hosting a program has grown tremendously. So yes, we're distanced, but that distance has actually created a closeness that didn't exist before. I want to tell you a story that happened in 1978. Wise words from the Rebbe. It was at the end of the Sukkot holiday, the end of Sukkot 1977. In the middle of the dancing, the Hakafot, the dancing in 770, the night of Shmini Atzeret, the first night of Simchas Torah, all of a sudden the Rebbe's face turned deathly white. He sat down in the chair, which the Rebbe never did during the dancing. And to make a long story short, it soon became very apparent that the Rebbe had suffered a very severe heart attack, and later that he would have an even more severe heart attack. The story is long. The Rebbe refused to go to the hospital. There's many fascinating details. But I want to share with you a brilliant insight that the Rebbe said after the night of Simchas Torah, after Havdalah. The Rebbe was always, during the holiday, together with the Hasidim the entire time, dancing together as one. And here he had been in his room. And he insisted that he wants to speak to the Hasidim. He wants to have a Farbrengen. And the doctors refused. You just had a serious heart attack. You should be recovering. You should be recuperating. And they would not allow the Rebbe to go speak to the Hasidim. Finally, a compromise was reached, and they decided that they would allow the Rebbe to speak for 5 minutes over a hookup on a microphone. Now, the microphone will be broadcast on the speakers downstairs, and this way the people gathered in the synagogue could hear what the Rebbe was saying in his office upstairs. I just listened to the recording of this about an hour ago to hear the words, but they're famous words. The Rebbe starts off by saying that although, for whatever reason, doesn't say the reason, we are now speaking after the Havdalah, after the holiday of Simchas Torah has already ended, which therefore allows us to use technology that we would not normally be using during the holiday. And this is allowing the words that I'm going to say to go to many who are far away. Then the Rebbe immediately says the following words: distant only physically, but it's self-verständlich, it's self-understood that they're spiritually close. They are rechokim begashmius. Yes, we are going to speak over a camera, over a Zoom, over Facebook, over a microphone to those who might be physically distant. But it's self-understood that they're spiritually close. 40 years before the Zoom, the Rebbe already coined this phrase, physically apart, but spiritually close. This is one of the beautiful messages for us of the honey we eat at Rosh Hashana. You know, We all dip the apple in the honey, right? We all know that we all eat apple and honey, and 1,000 people of our community have gotten a little jar of honey thanks to the hard work of my wife and all the volunteers. And there's much symbolism in the honey, aside for the fact that it's very sweet. I mean, candies are also sweet, but there's something very unique in the sweetness of the honey. You know what that is? Where does honey come from? A bee. There is nothing less sweet than a bee. Nothing more dangerous. A bee is annoying, they sting. Some people can get an allergic reaction that can be dangerous. But from the sting of a bee could come the sweetness of honey. This is such a powerful message for us. In the sting of the sting of a bee, in a non-kosher bee, a bee is not kosher. From that non-kosher animal can come the sweet, kosher honey that we all enjoy. Yes, we're far apart. Yes, we're living in difficult times. Yes, we are being forced to hide behind masks and to maintain distance from each other. But the distance is not a real distance. It's a physical distance. Not social distance. It's a physical distance. But the physical distance should allow us to create far more powerful spiritual connections with each other. I want to share with you just one story that happened to us last week. I don't want to take away the theme from next week's sermon that will be about I miss my community. That will be next week's sermon before Yom Kippur. But I want to share with you one story of the many. It was a life lesson that I learned, a life lesson I want to share with you, and a story on that brings us back to this idea that sometimes in the concealment we find the greatest revelation, the greatest opportunities. Many of you may know that a week ago we did a funeral for a man that had passed away and that had no family that would be attending the funeral. The details of his story are not important for tonight. I shared them in a class we did on Facebook last week. The point is that he was a man who, thankfully, with the help of some people in our community, with one person in particular, we were able to arrange that he should have all of his arrangements made. And when he died in a rehab center all alone, with nobody to be near him, with children that don't even know yet that their father passed away, who have not spoken to their father in many years. I got the phone call about the funeral. Baruch Hashem, he had paid in advance, not only for the funeral, but even to have a rabbi say Kaddish for him because he knew his children wouldn't do it. And I tried to make some arrangements. I spoke to a few people about coming to make a minyan, but I wasn't able to pull it off easily. And I knew that nobody was going to be at the funeral, not a single person. So nobody would know that nobody was there. And I had consigned myself to the fact that there would not be a minyan to say any prayers at this person's funeral, which to me was okay because there was no one there to say Kaddish anyway. After the class, someone that had been watching, truly kind person, messages me and says, "Let's make it happen, Rabbi. I'll get a limo. Well, let's make it happen." And at first I started to justify. It's called an excuse. It's actually called laziness. And I started to justify why I couldn't get a minyan. There's no one going to be there. 2 men from the Chaver Kadisha, from the Burial Society, and myself as a rabbi. That's 3. 3 is not enough to make a minyan. 7 is too many. How am I going to find 7 people in the middle of the day at 11:15 on a work day? And then I realized, it's not that I can't. I just don't want to enough. I don't know 7 men. So this guy had a great idea. Post it on Facebook and let's try. I said, I'm going to do it. I'll try. I'll put it out there. I had some reservation that it would work, but I have to try. I'm going to the truth. I was shocked. I was blown away by the kind of response that I got. I was not ready for the response that I received. I wasn't. A mother called me of a young son just been bar mitzvah. Said, I'll take my son out of school if you need him for the minyan. Let me know. By then I already had 14, 15 men signed up. I didn't need him. But I was so impressed. She was willing to take her child out of school to teach him the importance of helping a stranger have a minyan to bury him with the dignity he deserves. People that I have not seen in many, many months, including two people that I have not seen probably in 2-3 years, messaged me on Facebook. They're going to come. It was raining. It was terrible weather. I think we had 15 men just from the community, not even including the burial society, the Chevra Kadisha. And guess what happened next? As we're gathering together in the rain, the funeral home gets a phone call. The son that lives up in northern Florida, that had told them the day before that he was not going to attend, and maybe he would watch it on Zoom, maybe not, I wasn't sure if he would have time, decided late the night before to drive down and to attend his father's funeral. We waited 15-20 minutes for him to show up. And he came to pay the last respects to his father. And because of the outpouring of love, because of the people that despite the distance, despite not knowing this stranger, decided to connect and to come close, this son had a minyan to say Kaddish, probably the only time that he'll say Kaddish for his father. And I was in the cemetery, I was leaving the cemetery, and I couldn't get this thought out of my head. I couldn't believe it. And I remember speaking to this person afterwards. I said, what mitzvah, what merit did this man have? To have so many people gathered together, strangers, to give him this dignity. Look at the beauty. Look at this coming together of community. And then I remember this following beautiful story. I'm going to tell you a story about Rabbi Stephen Amnon, is his name. I saw a video of him saying this story. Every year his wife would go together with her whole family, her siblings, and her father to visit their late mother in the Staten Island cemetery on the day before Rosh Hashana. The whole family would get together to go pray at her grave. One year, she knew that year Rosh Hashanah she would not be in town, she wasn't going to be there, and it was a few weeks before Rosh Hashanah, and they were driving to go visit someone, and they were on Route 440, and up ahead they were coming to Exit 4. Exit 4 is the Arthur Kill Road. That is the exit that takes you to the cemetery. On the spur of the moment, Stephen Amnon turns to his wife and he says, we're not going to be at the cemetery on the day that your family gets together. We're passing by. Here's the exit. Maybe we should go today. We have time. Maybe we should go to the cemetery today so you can go visit your mother before the high holidays. She said, that's a great idea. And so they decide to stop. They go into the cemetery. It was an empty cemetery that day. They come in. They sit down. They go to the mother's grave. They're standing there. They're praying. And shortly after they come, this Rabbi Stephen Amnon sees a hearse pull up just 2-3 rows behind where they are. And some men get out, they take the coffin out, and they call them over. They say, we need someone else to say Kaddish. And so he comes to join them to say Kaddish. They say the prayers, and they say Kaddish. The body is still lying there on top of the opening in the ground, and they're getting ready to leave. So he says, where are you going? We didn't bury this person yet. And the family says, we don't do the burials too much. The cemetery will bury him later. The workers will bury him. We just wanted to say Kaddish, and we're leaving. And with that, the family left. Whoever was gathered there left, waiting for the cemetery to come and bury this person. Now, Stephen Amnon knows, he learned in yeshiva, that when you see a dead person, a dead body lying alone, unattended, unaccompanied, this is called a mes mitzvah. A mitzvah, a person to help this person have a proper kosher burial. And so he was all alone. He saw one of the workers. He got a shovel from the workers. The dirt was there. And he single-handedly began to shovel the dirt into the earth, into the hole over the coffin. Now, it's hard work. I've done this many, many times. To shovel all the dirt into the earth, into the ground is hard. And it took him over an hour all by himself. This Stephen Amnon stood there shoveling the dirt into the ground. covering the entire coffin. And as he was doing, once he already started, he wasn't going to stop in the middle of the mitzvah. He was wondering, who is this person that I'm burying? He was curious to know who was the stranger that he was giving this final honor, this final respect to. And so he takes the marker. They put a marker after a cemetery, after a funeral, they put a marker of the person's name. He takes the marker, he takes note of the name. He's wondering about it. The next day he calls his Rosh Yeshiva, his teacher. His teacher was the late Rabbi Herman Nuremberger, who was the principal of a yeshiva called Ner Yisrael, where he had learned as a student. And he calls his Rebbe, Rabbi Herman Nuremberger, and tells him the whole story and says, I was at the cemetery yesterday, they left the body, and I did the whole funeral all by myself. His name, I don't know the name, Chaim Beryl was his name. Rabbi Nuremberger tells him as follows. He says, I know this person. The person you buried, I know him. I want to tell you a story. When you were a young boy going to yeshiva, your father lost his job. And of course, he lost his job. They didn't have money to pay for the tuition for you to be in the yeshiva. But we weren't going to kick you out. And so I took it upon myself to find someone who would cover the scholarship and who would cover the cost of your tuition to be in yeshiva. The man that you buried was the man that 50 years ago paid for your tuition. It's an amazing thing. The holy Rebbe Yisrael Ruzhaner explains as follows. On Rosh Hashana, we stand before God and we read in the Amidah that God is Zocher Kol HaNishkachos. That God remembers all the things that are forgotten. There are acts of kindness we do, there's mitzvahs we do, there's little things we do that nobody sees. Nobody knows. It seems that nobody remembers. But upstairs, God, He is Zocher Kol HaNishkachos. He is remembering every one of those forgotten mitzvahs. The truth is also the other way, that when we remember something and we always remind people of what we've done and what they owe us and what we look at me, then God says, I can forget about it because they remember. But when we forget, when the whole world seems to have forgotten, God remembers. And God says, I won't forget, and He repays us back in full. This is something we have to talk about much more at length next week, God willing, because this is something that I've seen over and over again in the last few months. With one post on Facebook, men are coming from everywhere to make a minyan. Post on Facebook, the amount of volunteers, the amount of care and consideration and compassion that I personally have seen and witnessed firsthand in the last week is just amazing. It's humbling to me. It's just beautiful. So God has put us into a crazy situation. God not only is still wearing His mask, God has now put His mask on all of us. And God has forced us into distancing. And God has forced many of us to remain home. And God has forced many of us into situations financially that are difficult, that are emotionally difficult. And yet there's a reason for the mask. From concealment comes revelation. From darkness comes light. And in fact, as the wise King Solomon says, the famous Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of all men says, V're'isi, and I saw, there is advantage, there is a beauty to wisdom that comes after the foolishness. Like the beauty of light, the advantage of light that comes after darkness. When you're in a well-lit room, you don't appreciate the light. But when you're sitting in darkness, when the room is dark and cold and you feel frightened and alone, and then the light goes on, and you realize that you were not sitting in a cold, dark, empty room. You were sitting in a beautiful room with beautiful masterpieces of art hanging on the wall, beautiful chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, beautiful furniture, beautiful people sitting all around. And you realized that you were actually in a beautiful palace, but your eyes were covered and you couldn't see in the dark. The appreciation of the light to show you the beauty in where you are is just overwhelming. My friends, it seems dark outside. We're struggling behind the masks and we're struggling with the separation. But behind every separation comes a greater revelation. The physically distanced times are creating spiritually more connected people. And so as we enter Rosh Hashanah, let us all pray that this past year be the last year of concealment. The last year when God says, "V'anochi hastir astir panei," that I will conceal my face behind a mask. Let this upcoming year, the year of 5,781, in Hebrew, Tafshin Pei Aleph, be a year, as an acronym of the letters, to be a year of Plaos Arenu, where God will show us wonders, where God will show us his open, revealed face. Because we know that when Mashiach comes, God will tear away the veil. The verse tells us that then, your teacher will no longer, your master will no longer be hidden from you. There'll be no more concealment in the world. God will be revealed and we will see the smile that was behind his mask that we couldn't see till now. God's smile will be revealed and he will lift us all into a time of joy, into a time of world peace, into a time of no illness, of no sadness, of no death, a time when God will be revealed and all the goodness within us will be revealed, when the whole world will be good. With the coming of Mashiach, God willing, this very, very year, God willing, very, very soon. My friends, Hashana Tova to all of you.